Congratulations on the completion of chapter 3. Now we're going to move on to the next chapter, which is the chapter on market structures. And today I'm going to give you an introduction on the entire market structure chapter so that it'll be easier for you to understand the next few videos that's coming along. So the first thing we ask ourselves is, what is a market? So a textbook definition of a market is simply a system or an institution where certain things happen, right? So one of the things that happens is that the people inside this system or institution, they are going to engage in what we call trade. So buyers and sellers will come together and they're going to trade, right? So what are they going to trade? They're either going to trade goods for goods, and this is known as barter trade. I think some of you might have heard this term already. Or that's a more traditional way, right? They can also trade goods for money and vice versa. So that's like the more modern way of doing things. If I were to explain it in a simple way to understand, I would call a market a place, a mechanism, a force, or a structure. Okay, it is a place, mechanism, force, or structure that determines prices. The price is really important because it determines whether there's going to be trading done and how much quantity of goods is being traded. So the market actually determines the prices of goods and services. Okay, so you got different kinds of markets, right? You're gonna have markets for potatoes, all right? Maybe you got markets for rice, salt, and even sugar. So it's a market for physical goods. You can have markets for stocks and shares as well. And these things are being traded on the New York Stock Exchange, stuff like that, on the stock markets. And you even have foreign exchange rates. Okay, so foreign exchange rates are also determined by the markets. So I'm talking about, how much USD can I get per euro? So that's a form of exchange rate. Well, interest rates are also determined by the markets, and also wages, the amount of money that we pay to workers. So interest rates, just to remind you, is also known as a cost of capital. So all these things over here are essentially prices, right? So the market determines all these prices. Okay, as you can see over here, prices are determined by the markets, okay, through trading activities. So the price that is determined by the market also depends on what the market structure is. Okay, so it depends on the structure of the potato market, the structure of the rice market, stock markets, and even your labor market, okay, which determines your wages. And your exchange rates, because it's a cost of capital, I think you will be able to anticipate that it is determined in the capital markets. Okay, we can also call them the financial markets. So how are these prices determined by the market? How? Well, it's simple. It is determined by a balance. A balance of what? A balance of demand and supply. So once demand and supply has been balanced, we say that we have reached market equilibrium. So when the market is in equilibrium, you're going to get two things. Okay, the first thing you're going to get is the market or equilibrium price. Okay, the market or equilibrium price of the good. So that is where you have the prices determined. And you're also going to get the market or equilibrium quantity. So it is the amount that is being traded in the market. Okay, so how many units of a particular good is being bought or sold, right? Bought or sold, it means traded. As an introduction to economics student, you actually first encountered demand in chapter 2, right? I hope you remember it. So chapter 2 is about consumer theory. So if you understand the theory on how consumers behave, then you will understand how the demand is being derived. So just let me give you a quick run through, a quick recap on how the demand is being derived. Okay, so we're going to talk about deriving the demand for the entire market, because what you were learning in chapter 2 is simply deriving the demand for one individual. So here's where you began in chapter 2. Okay, so you have X and Y, a budget constraint, and an indifference curve. Now imagine the price of X is going to fall. That would bring the budget constraint outwards, and you have a new equilibrium here. So there is a change in demand, which is the quantity demanded, given a change in the price of X. So once you know this change, given a change in price, what you can derive is a demand curve for one individual consumer. So this demand curve that you see here is for one consumer. However, in the market, there's going to be many consumers. So let's just imagine that there are n number of consumers. So you need to add this demand curve to the demand curve of the other consumer that's just beside them. So this is another demand curve for another consumer. So you're just going to keep adding all these demand curves n times. Okay. After adding these demand curves n times, you should get the market demand curves. This is the total demand of all the consumers. So this is one demand, two demands, three demands, so on and so forth. Okay, you add up all the demands horizontally, and then you're going to get a market demand curve. Okay, so this is the sum of n consumers demand curve. To use a numerical example, if the product is $5, then one consumer will demand for two of them. Two consumers will demand for five of them, three consumers will demand for eight of them, so on and so forth. And let's just assume that the total market demand, given that the price of X is $5, is going to be 100X. So this, again, is the market demand curve. And 100 over here is what we call the total demand for good X, given that the price of it is $5. Now, let's talk about elasticity. Okay, the elasticity of the market demand curve, the price elasticity of demand, is actually the average of all the elasticities added up together. Okay, so that is the derivation of your demand curve. And typically, your demand curve is usually going to be downward sloping, right? And that applies to your market demand curve as well. So now that we are done with the consumer side, which gives you your demand, let's talk about the seller side, okay, or the firm side, which we need to understand their supply behavior. So this was actually learned in chapter 3, which is the study on firms' behavior, right? So the derivation of your supply curve is actually based on the profit maximization behavior. I'll be going through that in detail when we talk about the different market structures in the other videos. So typically, your supply curve is going to be an upward sloping curve. Now, let's take a look at the market being in the short run compared to being in the long run. Let's begin with the short run, shall we? A good way for me to remember this is that in the short run, the market is experiencing knee-jerk reactions. These are things like changing quantity supplied and quantity demanded, because the buyers and the sellers want to maximize, their profits and their utility, right? So they change the quantity that they demand given the change in price. So these knee-jerk reactions are actually caused by external forces to the demand or the supply. Okay, so these external forces to the demand and supply can actually cause a change in price as well as a change in quantity demanded as well. And there's a change in price when talking about the market price. And this change in quantity is due to the fact that firms want to maximize their profits, okay, given the new price. So in the long run, what happens is that the market price is solely determined by the cost structure of the firms. You see, sometimes given a new cost structure or new market conditions, some existing firms inside the market might actually leave because they are experiencing losses. So when firms leave the market, the overall market supply is going to fall. And as we learned from the previous chapter, when the price is less than the average variable cost, then the firms will actually leave the market. So firms can also enter the market and increase the overall market supply when they see that other firms are earning profits and they want a piece of it. But is it always true that firms can just come in whenever they want to? Well, we're going to go through this in a while. So when all the effects of these external forces have disappeared or worn off or simply gone, then we say that the market has reached its long-run equilibrium. And what you should know is that this decrease and increase in supply will affect the market price. Now, let's move on to a graphical approach so that I can show you how the market price is going to change given a change in demand or supply. So what we're going to do now is going to draw two axes, price and quantity, and then we're going to draw the demand and the supply curve. So let's just assume that there's going to be an increase in supply, all right? Maybe more firms enter. So the supply curve is going to move to the right from S0 to S1. Originally, we were at point A. This is the initial equilibrium in the market, given an equilibrium price of P0, equilibrium quantity demanded of X0. Let me show you exactly how the market price is going to fall. Okay, at the price of P0, the total supply in the economy is going to be X1. Okay, the firms are willing to supply more at this current price. Okay, so the demand is over here at point A, and the supply is over here at point B. So what you have over here, the distance between point A and point B, is what we call the excess supply. So it's not good to have excess, right? We need to remove the excess supply by reducing the price in the market. So when the price reduces, the quantity demanded will increase. Well, that's a law of demand. And when the price reduces, the firms will be less willing to supply, right? Because they can't earn that much. So you see the movement towards point C, and that is how we actually get the new market equilibrium price of P1, and the total quantity in the market is X2. So that's how the dynamics is. Now let's talk about another case. Let's talk about maybe an increase in demand. Okay, so there's an increase in demand. What happens is that the demand curve D0 is going to shift to the right to D1. Okay, the price level is still at P0. Therefore, at P0, your total quantity demanded is X1, which means that since the supply is over here at A and the demand is over here at B, what you call this now is an excess demand. So excess is not good, right? We have to increase the price to clear the excess demand. So the demand is going to fall due to the law of demand, and the firms will want to supply more since the price is higher. And this will bring us to point C, which is the new market equilibrium of equilibrium price P1 and equilibrium quantity X1. So when the market reaches its new equilibrium, okay, we say that the market clears. Let's talk about the thing that all the firms want to maximize, alright? Let's talk about profits. So while I'm writing down profits, you need to know that all the firms, no matter what market structure they are, they're all trying to maximize their profits. And you're going to have three types of profits, okay, that is existent. You're going to have the supernormal profit, normal profit, as well as losses. Okay, so these are the three main types of profits that you will see. So the first type of profit, supernormal profit, is where your revenue minus your expenditure minus your opportunity cost is more than zero. Okay, so OC over here stands for opportunity cost. You have to account this in because there are certain things that the entrepreneur could have done to earn more money. So he's foregoing that to actually start this venture of his. So there is a surplus of revenue after deducting away your expenditure and your opportunity cost, and we call this surplus entrepreneurial reward. Okay, so this is the rewards that the entrepreneur gets for taking the amount of risk to start the new venture. Okay, he's paid, but he's being paid more because of the risk that he has taken. So entrepreneurs, being entrepreneurs, will enter a market if they see that there is positive returns. So when these entrepreneurs enter the market, new ones, all right, you're going to see more firms coming out, and there's going to be more supply. So this is a good piece of note for the perfect competition model. Now, let's talk about normal profits. It is when there is no surplus at all. So revenue minus expenses minus opportunity cost is equal to zero. The firms break even. Okay, and for losses, I don't think I'm going to explain this. It is when the revenue minus the expenses and the opportunity cost is less than zero. Okay, so that sucks, right? So some of the entrepreneurs might leave the industry, right? Take note of the word some, not all. Okay, cool. So those were the basics of market structures. Now I can formally introduce you to the 4 different types of market structures that we study in economics. So the first type of market is known as the perfect competition. Okay, so you can also call it the perfectly competitive market. Short form, we call it perfect comp, right? The second type would be monopolistic competition. You can call it monopolistic comp, just for short form. Then the third type is known as the oligopoly, and the last one is known as your monopoly, right? As in like the board game Monopoly. The best way to define this is by the characteristics. So the perfect comp firm has got zero market power. Okay, what kind of power are you talking about? It is the power to set prices. So if they got no market power, they basically take the price. The firms are called price takers. They take the price that is set by the market. Okay, you studied this a little bit earlier. Now for the monopoly has the highest market power of all the market structures. So they're actually the price setters because they have the power to set the price. So the monopolistic firm is the firm that sets the market price. Well, it's pretty cool, right? If you could set the price, but you can't just set any price you want. You can't just charge anything. So the monopolistic comp and the oligopolies are the ones that are in the middle. The monopolistic comp is nearer to the perfect comp, and the oligopoly is nearer to the monopoly. Okay, so that is how they are differentiated. Okay, so why is it that the perfect comp has got zero market power and the monopoly has got very high market power? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I'm about to introduce you 4 determinants of market structure or market power. The first determinant is the number of sellers and the number of buyers. Okay, buyers and sellers are known as agents. And we are going to assume that there are many buyers in any market structure that we're going to talk about. So the only thing that you have to focus on is the sellers. The second determinant is the information availability as well as the mobility of the buyers. So what kind of information are we talking about? It is information of all the other prices. Okay, it's the prices of what the other firms are charging and also where to find the other firms. And mobility here refers to whether the buyers can buy from other firms that are charging at a lower price. Okay, so that's what we mean by mobility. The third determinant is the nature of the product. There will be more on that in a little while. And the last determinant is the barriers to entry or exits. Now I'm talking about barriers to the firms. Okay, the barriers that firms are going to experience when they need to either enter a market or leave the market. So let's talk about the number of sellers. Okay, there can be either many sellers in a market, okay, which means many firms, or there is only one seller in a market, only one firm. Okay, so a perfect competition market has got many firms, and it starts to get lesser as we move on to the monopoly market structure. The monopolistic market only has one firm. They call it the monopoly. Okay, so let's talk about how market power is being derived when there's many firms or when there's only one firm. So all these people are the buyers. So you've got many buyers. And in a perfect call market, you're gonna have many sellers. Okay, so there are 4 sellers here. Well, I think that's not enough. So let's add a few more sellers. Let's add 2 more. Okay, so now imagine if everybody else was charging $10 and this one firm is going to be charging $15. Who do you think the buyers are going to buy from? Well, definitely not from the guy that's selling at $15 because they could have gotten it cheaper elsewhere. So what if another firm is selling it at $9? Well, basically this firm selling at $9 is going to close down because he's going to be experiencing a lot of losses, okay? And we're going to talk about why they're experiencing losses in another video. Okay, now what if there's only one firm in the market? Okay, so all these firms are gone. So this is the monopoly. The blue color house is the monopoly and it's charging at $1,000. So people are still going to buy because he's the only one that's selling it. So this guy is going to determine the market quantity demanded, right, given the price that he sets. So this monopolist is going to choose the price or the quantity to maximize his profit. So it might not be 1,000, it might be lower or it might be higher, but he's basically going to choose the price that will maximize his profit. As you can see, being the only firm in the market or being the monopoly can actually give you market power to set the market price. For the next determinant, you can either have perfect info and mobility, or you can have zero info and mobility. Okay, let's talk about the perfect first. Okay, the perfect competitive market has got perfect info and mobility, and for the monopolies, they have got zero info and zero mobility. Okay, so this actually relates to the previous example. Information and mobility makes it easier for customers to switch between firms. Okay, so if there is no ability to switch between firms, or if they don't even know who else is selling at a cheap price, so they only rely on one firm, it is that firm is as good as being a monopolist because he actually controls the consumer. The consumer has got no opportunity to move to another firm that is selling at a cheaper price. The next determinant is the nature of the product. A product can either be homogeneous or heterogeneous. A homogeneous, which means identical goods, is being sold in perfectly competitive industries, and heterogeneous goods are being sold by monopolies. So homogeneous goods are not differentiated. So many of the firms in the perfect com market can actually sell it. And when many of them can sell it, it is easy for the buyers to find. There is zero market power for these perfect comms because they can't control the consumers. But for the monopolists, only one of them can sell it. So it is hard to find, therefore they've got power over the buyers, they can control the prices. And for barriers to entry, you can either have zero barriers or high barriers. In the perfect com market, there are going to be zero barriers to entry or exit. And for the monopoly market, there is going to be very high barriers to entry. So literally no other firms can come in. As discussed earlier, when there are positive profits to be made, it is easy for entrepreneurs to enter the market. Okay, so more firms can enter the market when there are positive profits, and it's easy for them to come in because there are no barriers. For the monopolists, they can be earning profits, but other firms can't enter the market because of those barriers. So it keeps the monopoly as the only firm and only seller in the market, and that gives it its market power. Okay, so when we talk about measuring market power, okay, we need to have a certain metric for that, right? So a good metric for this would be the marginal cost divided by the price. So it's a ratio of the marginal cost over the price. And for perfect comp, you'll notice that this ratio is equals to 1. And for the monopolist, this ratio will be less than 1. So we can actually conclude that when this ratio over here is closer to 1, we can actually say that that firm has got a lower market power. And when the ratio is actually closer to 0, we say that the firm has got higher market power. The rationale behind this is that powerful firms will be able to make more profits. So the distance between the price and the marginal cost is going to be higher, right? So if the firm can control the price, then the profits will be higher because the P is going to be more than the MC. Therefore, with a higher denominator, you will have a smaller ratio. So that's the rationale behind this ratio over here. Now that we understand the 4 different types of market structures and what determines them, we're going to move on to the last topic, which is allocative efficiency. So let's start with the definition of allocative efficiency. It is simply a measure of how available information is. Information for what purpose? It is information to maximize the opportunities that buyers and sellers have to transact or trade in the market. And more specifically, they are able to trade at the minimum transaction cost. To simplify everything into one word, I'm going to call allocative efficiency welfare. So you might be asking yourself, welfare for who? Is it welfare for the buyers or welfare for the sellers? Okay, let's take a look at that in a while. So we say that the market is efficient when the economic surplus has been maximized. And what you notice here is that welfare actually refers to economic surplus. So the total welfare is the same thing as economic surplus. So what does the economic surplus comprise of? It comprises of your consumer surplus plus your producer surplus. Okay, so it's a welfare for both the consumer as well as the seller. I'm now going to show you how to illustrate consumer surplus given a particular price of good X. So you need the demand curve over here. And let's just assume that the price of X is currently 5. So the market demand will give us a quantity demanded of 10. What if the consumer buys only 1 unit of X? He would have this amount of surplus. He was actually willing to pay up to $10 for that one single unit of X. But right now, he's only going to be paying $5 per unit. So his surplus over here is $5 per unit. Let's say that the consumer now only wants to buy 2 units of X. He would have this amount of surplus, okay, because he would have paid $9 per unit, but now he's only paying 5. Therefore, the amount of surplus that he has gotten per unit is going to be $4. So you keep doing this until the surplus reaches 0 at quantity of 10, okay? And what you can do is you can shade this triangle green. Okay, and you're going to call this the consumer surplus. So this entire area here is the value of the consumer surplus that the consumers have extracted, right? So the consumer surplus is also referred to the maximum willingness to pay minus the actual price that the consumer pays. Another useful term to describe the maximum willingness to pay is also called the customer's valuation. Now let's talk about the producer surplus. So you have a supply curve which is upward sloping over here, and imagine again that the price of good X is 5 and the firms are willing to supply up to 10 units of X. So the producer surplus can be described as the seller's gain. If he had sold only 1 unit of X, okay, he would have a surplus of this much. Why? Because at 1 unit, he might have only been willing to sell it at $1, but he managed to get $5, so that's a surplus of $4 to the producer. As the seller starts to sell more units of X, he's going to realize that there's always going to be positive surplus for every additional unit of X that he sells. So he keeps selling this until what we call the marginal surplus reaches 0, okay, which is at the price of 5 and the quantity of X. So you're going to shade that triangle in black, and that is going to be your producer surplus. So the value of the producer surplus is the area of the black shaded triangle. So the producer surplus can also be described as the actual price the seller sells the good minus the cost of the good, which is here referring to marginal cost. I will explain why the supply curve is the marginal cost in the next few videos. So here's some simple mechanics, right? If the price is going to decrease, what you notice is that the consumer surplus is going to increase and the producer surplus will decrease. And when the price increases, that makes your consumer surplus decrease, but your producer surplus is going to increase. So you see they all move in different directions given the change in price. So now the problem is, at what price is your consumer surplus and producer surplus maximized? You want to maximize the welfare of the economy, right? The welfare of society. So how do you determine the price that both the CS and the PS is going to be the maximum and making the market efficient? So I'm going to start by showing you a scenario whereby welfare is maximized and a scenario where welfare is not maximized. So we have the demand and supply curve over here, and this should give me a market equilibrium quantity of 10 and an equilibrium price of $5 per good of X. So this is my consumer surplus and this is my producer surplus. What you'll notice is that there is no way to increase either your producer surplus or your consumer surplus in this case. Well, you can try drawing it by yourselves. You'll just notice that the green triangle and the black triangle cannot be any larger. So now let's talk about a scenario whereby the market is not efficient. Just a reminder, the market is not efficient when the economic surplus or welfare is not maximized. We can also call this market failure. Earlier you saw that when the market price is determined by the intersection of the supply curve and the demand curve, you have got market efficiency, right? The welfare is maximized. But there can be cases whereby the market price is not determined by the intersection of the supply curve and the demand curve itself. So if let's say the price of good X is actually 10, which you see over here, then that means your quantity demanded is going to be only 3 units of X compared to 10. So this over here is your consumer surplus. Alright, this is a consumer surplus. And this over here is going to be your producer surplus, the black portion over here. I'm now going to need you to compare this graph to the previous graph. Now look at the green portion over here. You will notice that this green portion is smaller. Therefore, what it means is that the consumer surplus has decreased due to a higher price. Okay, we've already established this earlier. And for the producer has actually given up this amount of producer surplus to get this amount of producer surplus in return. So this red area here, okay, we're going to presume that it's going to be bigger than this area over there. If not, why would you charge a higher price? So your producer surplus would have increased. But the thing is that the producer has more surplus, but it is at the expense of the consumer. This blue triangle over here is what the society has lost. The firm could have actually reduced its price so that they can both capture this blue area. So this blue area is also the size of the inefficiency caused by the higher price of X. And we can also give this blue space a formal name. We can call it the deadweight loss. Now to explain the deadweight loss in simple terms, it is basically a loss in utility. This loss refers to the loss of the entire economy or society as a whole. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that was allocative efficiency for you. So let's go back to this part of the mind map and talk about the difference between perfect competition and monopoly when we talk about efficiency. So what you should know is that the perfect competitive market is the most efficient market because there's going to be zero deadweight loss, and the monopoly is going to be the most inefficient market because there is very high deadweight loss there. We will go into deeper detail when we move on to the specific videos for each market structure. We've had a great time creating this video and we hope you enjoyed it, and we want to thank you for studying with Quickienomics.